Welcome to the Cherland podcast, where I, Cherland, meet up with a musician, hear about what makes them tick, what kind of experiences they're bringing into their musical journey. And on today's episode, we have Tariqh Akoni, very special guest. Tariqh is everything you kind of want to be as an adult, in that, he just continues to evolve and grow and change in really interesting, cool, sophisticated ways. Incredible speaker, writer, guitar player, that's what a lot of people know him for, musical director, producer. The guy's smart, talented, thoughtful, listens really well, and speaks amazing things all the time. So we talk about a lot of things in this podcast. I personally am so moved by his story as someone who just ravenously learns tasks, learns flamenco, learns how to play nylon guitar, continues to just expand his skill set as he's called to. And that's the kind of person people continue to put in charge of things. So it's no wonder he's had so much success in his musical career. Please enjoy this conversation with Tariqh Akoni. It is incredibly intimidating to research you. That's what I realized. Obviously, there's like a ton of credentials. People ask you, like, go ahead and say like the people you've worked with, and you've done this a million times. So people like Josh Groban, Kenny Loggins, Whitney Houston, Stevie Wonder, Shaka Khan, Weezer, Christina Aguilera, Bette Midler, Chris Isaac, like large names. You've been a musical director, you've been a teacher, you've written 10 books. There's a lot that you've done.
I always say it's just being old. Like, I always count my gray hairs. I'm like, yeah, that's right, I did do that, didn't I? Yeah.
It's so many things. You seem like someone who isn't just good at one thing. You're extremely good at a lot of things and continue to add to the roster.
Oh, thank you.
And that is, one, I shouldn't compare myself to you, otherwise I will have a more serious panic attack. So I guess the first thing I wanna ask you about is this line that you've said a few times, which is "play like your life depends on it."
Mm-hmm.
And you, in the first time I heard you really speak, you talked about being in a sleeping bag in Boston on a cold night,
Right.
practicing guitar. And then you were like out playing 4 times a night, 5 nights a week, kind of a thing. Where does your drive come from? This like this hunger, like where's the start of that? Where did you first kind of notice it in yourself?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think, like a lot of people, I think I felt a little lost for a period of my life, where my parents always encouraged me to do whatever I wanted, but just be great at it. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. And even with music, I think you've heard me say this before, but I was going to high school and I played guitar, but I didn't think I was going to do it professionally. Like, I went down to UC San Diego to study with the thought that I would be an attorney, and thank God that didn't work out. But I've always been passionate about music. And I have to say, I think that actually that period that you're talking about, which was or let me go back 2 steps. I loved playing guitar, so I would wake up in the morning at like 5 o'clock in the morning and practice before going off to high school. So it was something I was passionate about and wanted to do. I just didn't know you could do it for a living. And I just didn't realize that, it was something that I should pursue, or if I had any aptitude for it. But it was going to Berkeley, and I always tell the story of finding out that I had to leave the school, before I was ready to leave. I had to make a decision, and that decision was, do you go back to Santa Barbara and do you go back to working at the YMCA and waiting tables or whatnot? Or do you take this as the universe kind of kicking you out of the bird's nest, and learn to fly? And so that's really where I started to realize what that meant, what it meant to kind of go to the mat and what it meant to really kind of fight for your supper and whatnot. So for me, I wouldn't say it's always been something I had in me, but it's I should say it's not always something I recognized. But that was the moment where I realized it's like, okay, this is something that I've got to push and pursue and find out how to make this happen, because literally my life depends on it. I don't eat if I don't work, and what that means. And I think the benefit of doing it at that time was, I think I was maybe 21 or 22, so it was a great time to be a starving artist. It would be much more difficult to have been 40 or 50 or something like that with the responsibilities I have, now, and to be able to go, you know what, I'm just going to live off of spaghetti until I, and by spaghetti, I don't mean anything fancy. I mean like ragu, like a big, jug of ragu, and like the cheapest thing I could afford. And that way I don't have to take gigs I don't want to take, or I can focus on not having to work day jobs I don't want to work. And I can focus on making music my living, So yeah, so that's how it happened for me.
In that time that you get kicked out, like obviously the school has a syllabus for you to continue to sharpen your skills and expand. How did you pick your own learnings? Was it based off of the people you were gigging with, learning their material, or how did you choose to expand and sharpen your skills during that time? Like, how did you pick?
That's a great, great question. I mean, I will say two things about that. I think one of them is, for me, it was a bit of necessity. It was recognizing where, so part of what was important about that learning process is it is based on need versus want. It is based on, how do I get this gig, or how do I, what am I missing? Where am I deficient in order to kind of make that happen? Versus, I mean, the want is very important. And I think especially when you go to music school, one of the beautiful things is you can lean into want. You can lean into, I want to study Gregorian chants, or whatever, wherever your interest lies. But when you get into that necessity is the mother of invention, you get into the, like when I moved out to LA, I didn't feel like I played acoustic very well or read music very well. And so I recognized that if I didn't get those skill sets together, I wouldn't be able to do the gigs that brought in more money, the higher paying gigs, doing TV, movies, all of that stuff. Part of being able to do those was learning those skill sets. So I've never been afraid to, like with Josh Groban, when I first started working with Josh, they wanted to hire a nylon string specialist. And so I said to them, let me audition, because I was already playing electric and I just wasn't very facile with nylon string and classical. And I said, let me audition. Let me show you that I can do it. And I called a friend of mine who taught classical guitar, and I'm like, you have to teach me how to do this so I can get this gig. Same thing when I got the gig with LeAnn Rimes, is I called my buddy Steve Travato and said, I need to learn how to play country music fast, Or on the last Josh tour, he said, we're so fortunate we got Vicente Amigo to play flamenco guitar on a track. And I was like, I don't play flamenco. So I called my friend Adam Del Monte and I was like, you got to teach me how to play flamenco. Because for me, it was a necessity. And so there's a certain amount of it that are marketable skill sets that everybody should have in place. And then these other kinds of things that were for me a bit more catch as catch can of I need to put these skill sets in place if I want to continue to work. And then the other part of it was when I would get a gig, regardless of the style or whatnot, I would always think, what is my opportunity for learning here? Like with the Backstreet Boys, it was, here's an opportunity to study pop music, whether or not it's something I would listen to in the car. And I love all those guys, but it wasn't something I listened to at the time. It was like, here's an opportunity for me to study pop music. And with Shaka Khan and, artists like that, it was like, well, here's an opportunity for me to study funk rhythm guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and luckily I got the gig and I'm kind of thrown, or there's that crucible, but really I always grab those opportunities to go, even a top 40 gig, if you're playing Shania Twain, it's like, okay, how much can you get out of that? Don't just do the bare minimum, figure out what instruments was he playing, like what's the articulation and inflection, how does that part speak? And then when that turns into being a producer or a musical director, you also have more language to communicate with artists and to communicate in their backyard, to go, listen, when you're talking about classical music, you're not just talking about bar to bar, you're talking about dynamics and inflection within the line and how the melodic line speaks and the relationship between one melody and another melody, versus when you're talking about larger production stuff where when I'm with Christina Aguilera, it's like my role is very narrow and very few people are going to hear whether I'm playing, an eighth note mezzo forte or mezzo piano. It's like, it's about a larger thing and having a bigger view of the playing field and what your role is in that playing field. So I know that's a little broader than your question, but it leads into this idea of the biggest thing about that pivotal moment for me was learning how I learn. And then as a teacher, how to impart that to people and get in to where they learn. Like not forcing them to like learn the way I learn, but getting into how they learn. Like, are they tactile? Are they visceral? Are they kinetic? Are they visual? Like, what is their learning process? How do you connect this to something that has sustainability and staying power, in terms of kind of their ability to recall it, to enjoy it, to like find love in it and all that stuff. So meeting you where you are as a teacher was a big part of it for me.
That's impressive and very consistent with a lot of people, like Steve Jobs, who's like one of their advices is like, you take the job and then you learn the skill, or you outsource the skill. Like you just take the job and then you immediately have incentive to learn it, or you burn, and you don't like to burn, so you'll figure it out.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, I think that's an important point, because the other side of it, once you get into management and administration, is understanding how to delegate and understanding kind of what tasks to outsource. Because, I couldn't do as many things as I do on a day-to-day basis if I didn't have a team in place that I can trust, that I can hand something off and go, you do this, bring it back to me so I can top line it and let you know, is it what I want? Is it the way I want to see it? Can I hand it off to this other person? Like even a guitar tech. Like when I work with a guitar tech, it's a very intimate relationship where I'm like, I can't focus on that, because if I'm focused on whether my guitar is in tune, then I can't focus on whether or not the French horns are playing the right notes. You know what I mean? So I have to be able to let that person do their job so I can do my job.
Right. Right. Getting even more nitty gritty into like some of those basic skills that musicians should have if they're like wanting to read music or like learn how to do proper rhythm guitar, other than like playing to a metronome, other than like buying a book that teaches you how to play guitar by sight. Like what is there a specific author or course or method that was really useful to you?
There's a lot. But if I were to make a recommendation to listeners, it would be the answer to every question you have is on some recording somewhere. So I think that the best learning process is transcription and learning songs. And there's a process behind it. Like it can't just be learning the song and then walking away going, oh, look, I know, let it be. There's a part of it that you have to actually pull it apart, understand the making of it, and in whatever terminology or words you use, and I'm an advocate for music literacy and whatnot, but it's not something that has to be there to have a career in music. Like Paul McCartney doesn't read music, and Paul McCartney might not even know what he's doing in terms of it's the 4 minor or it's the, flat 2 diminished or whatever. He might not know that or know the terminology of it, but he knows how it functions in his universe of writing. And the way that you develop that is taking apart those records and really, really listening with a critical ear and starting to put into a terminology that works for you. And where that meets music education is my wife has a great saying where you can't read a book about swimming. You have to get in the pool. So similarly, you have to like get into the creation of music and fail, and then use educational resources to remediate issues. You know what I mean? So for instance, as opposed to reading a book about swimming and then being frustrated that you can't swim when you get in the water, you get in the water and then you go, you know what? Why can't I get faster? What is it that I'm doing fundamentally wrong? What is, and so you start to kind of remediate those issues to tighten those things up. And the other thing that it does is it starts to refine your taste in the sense of who you are and what you gravitate toward. Like, for instance, if you love, let's say, Radiohead, Weezer, and John Mayer, who you are is in that nexus of all three of those people. So if all those people wind up influencing you, that kind of amalgam starts to define who you are as an artist. And it might be, I love the production of Radiohead, I love the writing of Weezer, and I love the guitar playing of John Mayer. It could be any number of things that kind of turn you into the artist that you are. So for me, and it also, as we all know, Your technique builds up because it's in the function of something you care about, you want to succeed. And then where you find that last 10%, kind of the good is the enemy of great, when you're pushing towards great, it's refining past just I can do it to I excel at this, or I'm really articulating in this thing. So that's where you start to get into what is pro versus good, you know. And I also have to, there's a bifurcation between, you know, I for most of my career have been in the service of something, whether it's as a producer, a sideman, an author, a composer, like for media, those kinds of things. I have rarely in my life been the artist, you know. So when you are the artist, it's a different kind of skill set that you're putting together versus someone like me, where I've got to play classical, then country, then jazz, sing a little bit, do these other things. When you're an artist, you can be a little more kind of finicky about how you make those decisions, because part of it is bringing people to you as an artist as you develop your fan base, you know. So I'm articulating this in terms of being a working musician, but I just want to kind of make sure there's an understanding that what I do is one slice of the pie, and there's other slices of the pie where you don't have to feel as incumbent. But to that point, you have to also draw a distinction between art and commerce, where as an artist, you shouldn't feel like you are a slave to commerce, but there is that part of it where you could be the most incredible, never heard of artist in the world, or you might have to make concessions in order to be heard, you know, and all that stuff. So finding where that ratio is important.
Yeah. I wanna cover that in a little bit, but you also mentioned like being the nexus of some of your favorite artists and like taking production lessons from some, taking musical direction from others, songwriting from someone else. But like you not only are like a incredible guitarist in all these different genres, but you've continued to expand as like a producer, songwriter, and you've been a musical director for like a really, really long time. Can you tell me about the start of you moving from like, okay, this is Tariqh, the guitar guy,
Yeah.
into someone being like, hey, I mean, what I assume happened just based off of knowing you is like someone was like, hey, I need this. And you were like, yeah, I can do that.
Well, to a certain extent, I mean, but it was actually a weird transition because when they first asked me to musical direct for Josh, I said no twice because for me, I had just come off of working with Christina Aguilera, and I didn't really want to take on too much responsibility. I just wanted to like show up and play guitar. But I realized that Josh needed someone at that time to step in, and I wanted to be that for him, you know, and I wanted to provide value. And everything is a process, and generally when you start something, you're going to suck. And I was never the kind of person that wanted to or needed to be the loudest voice in a room, or felt like it had to be my perspective, it had to be my way. Like that was another kind of a thing for me. So I wasn't naturally inclined to just take over something like that. It took a little bit of a push. And I think one of the places where I was able to provide a lot of value was in my experience, just as a working musician, and kind of what systems needed to be in place, and also building systems, building kind of efficiencies in systems. Because as a musical director and as a producer, part of your job is to clear the path for an artist to be the best artist they can be. You know, so like if I'm producing you, part of it is you know, getting the best performance out of you, you know, setting up all these things in place so that, you know, you can realize your vision. But part of the goal in a larger kind of arcing concept is I want you to feel like you can be the best Connor you've ever been. I want you to walk away from the experience going, check me out on this record. This is the best record I ever made. Same thing as a musical director. And sometimes that means being a cheerleader. Sometimes it means being a psychologist. Sometimes it means being, you know, writing charts. Sometimes it means meeting with, you know, choirs in South Africa or whatever. It's like, you know, all of these things are under that umbrella. And so you try to build in these kinds of efficiencies to make those things work. The transition for me, once again, was a little odd because, as I said, it's never something I, quote unquote, sought out. Like some people seek out being a musical director. It was more something that people leaned on me and said, we need you to step in here. And so I did. And I love doing gigs where I just get to play guitar. Like when I went out with Bette Midler, my buddy was the musical director. And it was one of the most fun tours because I got to just like show up with a cup of coffee, read charts, try to kick ass. And then, and then after I got to go home, I didn't have to have meetings with writers and lighting directors and, all that kind of stuff. It was like, I got to just like go, hey man, good out. And I think I got him a mug that said Best MD and like put it on his piano. And I was like, that's for you. I'll be over here playing guitar. So yeah.
When you are working with an artist as a producer, let's start with producer and then let's move to director. What's something that makes it a really pleasant? So one of my personal issues is always focusing on others and making sure that your experience, which I think is good to be considerate, and now I'm realizing it can be a hindrance at certain times.
Yes.
But what are some things that make producing an artist really pleasant, easy, nice for you? What are some things that make it sticky, rough, rocky?
Probably what makes it rocky for me is I don't mind perfection or perfectionist. I mind when people don't know what perfect is. I mind when people don't know what they're going for, but they keep wanting to dig. Like I like there to be some articulation of that and scope of work, because it's so easy to get mired in options and whatnot that unless you have, for those that are listening that are tech savvy, when you start to work in a DAW and as a producer, and you start to buy plugins, like you can buy thousands and thousands and thousands of plugins, or just reverbs, But if you don't know what you're going for, then you're just mining all these things without really any sense of what constitutes good or bad. So that thing where it can start to get sticky is that subjectivity and not having a clear sense of what the parameters of that subjectivity is. Because what I think is good might not be what you think is good, and vice versa. So trying to draw some of those parameters around it is important. So you were asking about subjectivity, but I think, did we kind of move through that a little bit, or did that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like definitely, I built websites for 2.5 years, and in that time I built 500 websites. And you have all of this feedback from, and this is what I learned in all creative practice, is you might match the creative brief perfectly, and then they'll tell you it's entirely wrong, but they won't have the vocabulary to tell you why or what needs to change. So that's why you try to limit the number of revisions you can make before you get paid, because otherwise you're just going to be there forever waiting on that final payment.
Absolutely. And I think that's, like you said, in all creative endeavors, and I think that as a producer, part of that's also your job is finding that dialogue, that verbiage, and finding, to me, common ground. So for instance, in that kind of pre-interview or pre-production, to get a sense of, hey, show me 4 websites you like, or hey, play me some stuff that you're really into, or even finding out, when someone was, if you're working with a film director or whatnot, getting a sense of, are there any instruments you hate? Are there any scores you dug? Who were some of your influences? When were you born? So let's say you were born in 1960. That means that in 1976 you were 16 years old. So there's a good chance a lot of your influences, come from 16 to 25, kind of in terms of, kind of profound, foundational influences. So it just starts to give you a little bit of a dialogue of how this person kind of interacts with the world around them. So it's kind of an informed way of coming at them with something creatively, and part of it as a producer is also wanting to put someone in a space. There's a great legendary studio guitar player who said to me one time, you can either perform a recording or record a performance. And there's 2 different ways of looking at something like that, where there is an aesthetic to capturing a moment in time, capturing magic. And I tend to think that those are the recordings that we go back to year after year after year, because there was something about that moment, something about that vocal, something about that thing that captured our attention and brings us back to listen to it over and over and over again. When you squeeze all the air out of that stuff, I think that you lose sight of what makes that stuff special, important, compelling, dangerous, all those things, and so as a producer, part of the idea is, how do I put you in a space where you can get to that emotional resonance? It could be something like, listen, let's take this up a half step so that when you go to the bridge, you're pushing right at the edge of your range. So there's an emotional delivery, because even if I get it once, that for me is what I'm going for. And it could be also casting musicians where you're like, these are people that you feel like you're completely free with, and I want you to feel like you can do anything you want. Or conversely, maybe you feel too free, so let me bring in somebody that is, that's going to ground you in this. You know what I mean? Like you have to, of course, get along. I want you to but that Rick Rubin mindset of let me find a space where, almost with that, like with Pinot Noir grapes, with like lack of water, the way that it's like they have to become a little bit more sturdy, and it's a different kind of performance of the grape. So those, I mean, once again, it's all in context of wanting the artist to walk away feeling like they have the best recording possible. And I don't like conflict in recording. Some people do; they feel like that's the best stuff. But I feel like there's a difference between conflict and building resilience, and that kind of thing. There's a difference between like actual head-to-head conflict and resistance or friction, because I think sometimes friction can lead to a certain kind of emotional thing, but conflict to me typically people shut down. So I want you to feel free in that environment.
Conversely, what do you feel is the artist's responsibility? Like you're very clear about what you need to control and what you can control, which is how you arrive into that space. What do you see as like some of the best ways for an artist to arrive into that space? Like stuff they could have done the morning of, the night before.
Oh, I mean, that's a great question. I think it's a couple of things. I think that the first thing as an artist is you have to have a story to tell, and you've got to have the confidence to tell that story, or the courage to tell that story. It's like you got to start there, where if you don't believe it, how can you expect someone else to buy it? And if you're not willing to open yourself up to that, then how do you expect someone to give up that $20 or $15.99 or $10.99, of their hard-earned money to support that art? You know what I mean? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think that the more clarity of vision an artist has, the better off they are. But I think that you also have to allow yourself to be a bit malleable. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to go in and hire a producer and then not let them produce. You want to like cast the correct producer to help you realize your vision. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to necessarily bring somebody else in who's like a hip hop producer and you're trying to do like a metal record. I mean, possibly, going back to Rick Rubin, possibly. But you want to have a clear sense of like, this is why this person's here. And one of my things is you hire people you trust and trust them. Let it grow beyond that kind of control of it all has to be my vision. Because if that's the case, you might as well do it on your own, and let it be the sum of its parts. So for me, the way an artist can show up is obviously there's the pre-production, there's the openness to kind of collaboration, where you feel comfortable collaborating. There's some of the pre-production stuff, like having some of the vision in place. And I think those discussions with the producer leading into the studio are important. So like, I like to get in on the songwriting side sometimes, not as a collaborator necessarily, but just like, I'd like to see your lyrics. I want to see what you're going for. And we might have a discussion and go, is this what you were trying to say? Is this, is that the easiest way to say it? Maybe this would be stronger here. Like have a really frank discussion about that. And if you say, no, that's what I'm trying to go for, it's like, great. Like, I'm not trying to put my name on the record as a co-writer. I just want to, I want it to stand up to a bit of scrutiny, because I want to make sure that it's as potent and powerful as can be. And then those discussions of like, I would probably say to you, hey, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm hearing. What do you think about this? And you might go, that's crazy. Let's not do it. Or you might go, man, I'm into it. Let's go for it. And then we try stuff. So to me, it's like, it's a collaborative experience of getting across the finish line that way. So that for me is where I want an artist to show up is, I don't want there to be an expectation that like your record is my job. It's like, it's our job. And I want you to come in with perception, perspective, energy, like that's something where it's like, it's like, I need you to show up. I can't want it more than you. Like, that's not fair. You know what I mean? It's like got to both want it, you know? And then I think it's a great experience.
I imagine, and I imagine based off of my experience, I've only worked with one producer, and that's this last producer.
Yeah, and you were saying it was a really positive experience.
Very positive experience, but I imagine that he's worked with a lot of people who have been very hands-off and make him want it more.
Yes.
And versus I was in the studio as much, he had to tell me, like, I think you should go.
Yeah.
Because he was
right.
like, I'm just doing bass, and honestly, like it's cool to have you here, but like I think you should just go and like let me, because I'm it's just me doing bass, and that's it. And I was like, oh, okay. But I was like, oh, this guy, I'm pushing the limit of
right. Which is always tough, because I mean sometimes like if he's not a bass player and like he's just laying down bass, sometimes you don't want to be witnessing your process, or sometimes also you go, listen, let me get it to a space where I'm open for critique. Because you might be in a space where you're going, don't play that note. And it's like, okay, I'm in a flow. Like, so that some of it's that, like, I'm that way. I like to go, let me finish this, and let me present it to you, and then give me your notes, and let's adjust, especially like writing to picture. It's hard because there's such an excoriating process of trying to find the right tone and the right instrument and the right that it's like you don't necessarily want somebody over your shoulder going nah, and you're kind of like, okay, that's just a little sound that's going to go on the corner, so before you say no, let me present to you what I'm thinking and in full view. I think that the other thing about the energy thing, like you were saying, is a teacher said to me one time, if my job is to light your fire, it's going to put my fire out. And so there's that part of it where I'm not saying you have to be like me and be on all the time, but, I want you to be excited about the process, and I want you to get energized. Like if you're just suck the air out of the room, we can get it done, but it's this arduous task of like this difficult birth versus like, people are high-fiving in the studio like, oh my God, that was the take, and did you catch that? Like I remember I was recording a songwriter. I had the band in the control room, and he was just going to demo this song. He went on the live room, demoed the song, and the bass player looked at me going, what do you need us for? Like he was kind of like, that's the take. Like it was so naked, and it was something that nobody thought would be that it really took other eyes to go, dude, like let's not mess this up by playing on it. Let's let it be that. And so to me, it's part of that collaborative thing of, bringing that energy, bringing those ideas to the table, having it be greater than the sum of its parts. It's all of those things that make those experiences that much more kind of fulfilling,
Zooming out again to your just general skill set, because we can keep going a lot of different directions. I know you got to go in a couple minutes, but I'm going to ask you about speaking. You're clearly one of the most eloquent speakers that I know. And you act surprised every time I say it, but it's...
Well, I hate the sound of my voice, and I feel like I speak quickly and I mumble. So I appreciate when you say that. So thank you.
Oh, I feel like you do speak quickly, but you're very articulate.
Thank you.
So it's it's very clear to me what's coming through, and you speak quickly because there's a lot you have to say. And I also, one of the other things that I've picked up that you do is when someone says something that you really like, you immediately point at them.
Yes.
And then you cover your own mouth and you wait, and then you say, and then just to dovetail off of what you were saying.
Yeah.
When it comes to your speaking ability, clearly you've been a teacher, you write books, you have something to say, you have something to give. Who do you look toward as an inspiration, as like a standard in terms of like speaking? Who do you try to model?
Well, I mean, my father was an educator, so for me, he was he was a big figure in my life. What I loved about my father is he loved discourse, and I love words. Like I love words. I love the power of language, and I love the power of words, and I love the power of elocution. And I think that people in the past couple of years have started using words as a blunt instrument. And for me, it's like, it's something that can convey such complexity and turn of phrase. So that's why I love lyrics. That's why lyrics are so important to me, because it can change your life. I mean, literally, like it can be something where one lyric makes you look at the world through a whole different lens. So for me, probably my dad is my biggest inspiration in terms of that. And to your point, I think the other part of it for me is I want people to feel heard. So that's one of the reasons I'll cover my mouth, because I want to say something, but I'm like, I want you to feel heard. And I mean, let me rephrase, I want to hear you, but also it's important to me that you feel heard in this context, because when you have a dialogue with someone, we've all been in that experience where I'm like when you feel like you're being cut off and you're like, well, how do you even know what I was going to say? I want to make sure that, I also want to get it clear, because I'm like, listen, I think that what you were saying is this, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that reminds me of this, and are we saying the same thing? Because I love that relationship and those relational moments. And I think that in terms of collaboration, whether it's in business or in music or whatnot, those are the best moments when you really feel like, man, when I get together with this person, I feel like I am myself times 10. Or they bounce off of what I was saying, and we're like, coming up with stuff, that you wouldn't expect. For me, those are really important moments. And I think you'd be surprised how few artists create art in a vacuum. Going back to Kenny Loggins, it's funny, the number of times I've talked to Kenny and he's told me what outside influences influenced songs that he wrote, like songs that we all, know and love, and how many of the songs were written in collaboration with other people, and how much he likes to collaborate, because he's such a big name and a big figure in terms of kind of, his contribution to music, that you forget that he really opens himself up to this idea of, no, I want to hear your thought. I want to collaborate. Let's try this. Paul Simon, like when Paul Simon goes in and is working with musicians, so much of it is bringing you and your voice, and like, because you played it that way, now I want to hear this on the keyboard. Hey, check out what he did over here. And it's this organic kind of iterative growth. And that for me is really important. So from a speaking standpoint, my father was an educator. My mom is a highly educated individual also. But he kind of imparted to me the importance of communication and the importance of dialogue, but also finding those points of kind of understanding. Like, he was the kind of person where if he strongly disagreed with someone, he would want to sit and talk to that person to like find a point of resolution, whereas I'm not as patient as he was. But he was just that kind of person. And so I really appreciated that and admired that about him.
We have a couple minutes left. I do want to follow up on that. There are also other questions that I wanted to ask you, so I'm just quickly prioritizing. But because you're so good with words and good at understanding, like you are a very good listener. Being a good collaborator means being a good listener. I can see your vision. I can hear what you're going for. I communicate to you what I think it's where I think you want me to take it, and then when I get then I take it there. I imagine you'd be very good at avoiding conflict, but there are also people who conflict kind of follows them where they go. Without naming any names, like at your stage in a career, do you work with people you don't like?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Let me rephrase. At a certain point, a lot of those rough edges get sanded off. Like, if someone's really a difficult person, they just don't last that long. But there's rarely people I don't like. I might not like the way people do things. I have a couple people that I just won't work with, or just avoid, or don't like. There's one person I say is a horrible human being that in order for me to work with that person, they have to pay me a hassle tax. But there's a difference between that and people who are quote unquote difficult, like especially artists. I have a soft spot in my heart for that, because no one knows what someone goes through to get their art to where it needs to be. And so when someone has to go through the crucible in that way, or they're judged a lot in their life, or you think about, in a different sense, you think about like Jennifer Lopez or the Kardashians, and you go, here's a person that every time they leave their house, there are people trying to take pictures of their worst angles and worst moments and trying to capture them and saying the wrong. I mean, think about how much your life has to be guarded in that sense. I don't judge those people very harshly. I'm like, look, I understand why you need things to be right. I understand why these things are important. And I want you to feel seen and feel heard and feel supported in getting where you need to go to create your art. So for me, it's like I actually naturally have a bit of a soft spot for it. And I just had this happen. I was working with an artist who everybody warned me about. And they said, listen, this is going to be tough. Good luck. The artist was not easy. But I also really had a moment where I recognized the reason this artist is this way is they don't feel seen and heard and feel like they have to fight for every concept because this artist was not super musically literate, and when you're in a situation where you're surrounded by a lot of pros and all that stuff, sometimes people don't listen to your voice or pay attention to you, or they'll you feel diminished in that capacity. And so it was really important for me that this artist feel heard and seen. And I was like, listen, I will do everything in my power to get you what you need, because I know that you're striving for something special. You don't have to say it to me in a way that I need to hear it. Like, I understand what you mean. I'll see if I can clarify, but I know how to communicate, that you say you want it more purple to the monitor engineer, so that the monitor engineer knows, like, you say purple, I might say, 4 dB at 2K. Like, I might understand how to communicate that in language for that. And for me, facilitating in that way is part of what is being a producer or a musical director or those kinds of things. So yeah, but there are people I work with that, like, I'd rather not. Yeah, I don't like people that are mean to other people. I don't like people who are dismissive. I don't like people, like, everybody's got an ego, and I think ego is important. But when it becomes overblown and you have to, like, cater to someone's ego before you can actually get to the person, that's something I prefer not to have to deal with. But it happens.
It's helpful to know some of the guardrails and then things in the middle. All right, last question. We got 1 minute. Any book recommendations, authors that have been meaningful for you? It doesn't have to be music related. Just within the last couple of years.
Oh wow! Doesn't have to be music related. Okay, that can go down a wormhole. So let's keep it music related. But there's a book called How to Build a Sustainable Music Career and Collect All Revenue Streams by Emily White, that I think is really great. There's another one, and I thought I might even have it around here, that's called Sign Yourself, and I'm not going to remember the author's name. And then there's one called Sonic Boom that's about Warner Brothers, like the ascent of Warner Brothers Records, that Hale Milgram, who's a legend of the industry, recommended to me. And it is a fascinating, fantastic, and incredible book. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I'm glad
My
to
pleasure.
say that I've used up every single second of this hour, and I could ask you so many more questions, and I will off of this call.
Feel free. And just so you know, it's like, as you know, Connor, it's like, I consider myself an open book with this stuff. Myself and, I work as director of A&R at Santa Barbara Records, and our general manager, Billy, have devoted a lot of our times to artist empowerment and mentorship and education and whatnot. So it's really important to me to not only share this stuff, but to show people a pathway, a pathway towards sustainability, towards, having a long, career in music, all that kind of stuff. So I'm always open to questions and chatting and communicating with people. So thank you for inviting me on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I'll talk to you soon. I'll go ahead and clap us out.